Okay. So yesterday we left off at the crime scene, or it might have been, no, it should have been yesterday. Okay, so yesterday we left off at the crime scene sketch, and now we're going to move on to the next of the 7 S's is search. So search for evidence. Okay, so we have a pattern. We have different types of patterns to search for evidence. You're going to learn more about this in the activity you're going to do. Oh, of course, we have announcements going on. Okay, so a pattern should be walked and the location of evidence marked and then photographed and sketched. So this is how we're searching for evidence. Now, most of the time, this is not going to be something that they use so much in like a small area, like inside of a house, inside one room. Usually if the crime scene is like in the living room, something like that, you're going to search everything. Okay, so you're just going to get on like hands and knees and tape the entire floor area. Every couple feet, you're going to close up the tape, put it inside a package, and then do another part. And each one you're going to label where that tape came from. So it can be a pretty tedious task depending on the location that you're in and the type of crime. And also kind of how much time they're willing to dedicate to finding the evidence, which is hopefully a lot, or it's harder to solve the case. But sometimes there is time crunches. It kind of depends on where the crime scene is at. But for bigger scenes where we're trying to, like maybe the crime scene is spread out, maybe it's outside, something like that, some of these search patterns will come into play. So the first one is the spiral method, okay? So in the spiral method, you're gonna start at the head or at the piece of evidence. Usually, so like this is giving you an example, like start at the body, and then we're gonna try to find evidence as we spiral out for them. And they're gonna designate an area of where the crime scene perimeter is. So they're gonna say like, from this, what is it in yards? Acres? Yeah. So most houses are sold by acreage. So maybe they're like for like this acre out to this acre out, we're going to go and walk this spiral pattern, see if we can find any piece of evidence. If we do, then we'll mark that location. Like we'll have crime scene markers on us. Another type of pattern you can walk is the grid pattern. So in the grid pattern, you first, doesn't matter which direction, but let's say we're starting this direction. So you walk up, and then you're going to turn and walk back down, and then you're going to walk up and walk down, walk back up and walk back down, and then you turn to go a different direction. So I'm going to follow, and again, I'm going to go down, then back up, and then down, then back up, and down, okay? So that's like making a grid. So that is going to be more detailed. A spiral is kind of like you're trying to cover a lot of space really quickly. Maybe you don't have a lot of time, so I'm just like, I'm just going to spiral out. This, like I'm going to be very tedious. I'm going to walk my grid pattern and see if I find evidence along the way. The next pattern we could use is called linear. I also usually add the strip pattern here. Strip is very simple. So for linear, this requires 2 people. So if you see the 2 arrows going at once, so if I have 2 people helping me do this searching, so like they'll walk in tandem. Oh, I just zoomed in for some reason. There we go. So they'll walk next to each other and then go up and turn down. So kind of just like this one where you're going up and down, just instead, you're just literally going to go loop, doom, and then you're going to start back over, loop, doom, and then start over, loop, doom, and then start over. The strip method, which is a lot like the linear, it's just instead of going up and turning to go back down, the strip, you just literally line people out. This is the fastest method. So like, let's say we're trying to find someone really quickly. Maybe you have a missing child that got lost in the woods. Maybe you have a missing hiker and you're trying to find him really quickly. So in that case, you're trying to find them fast and trying to cover a lot of space. So you would just line up as many people as you have that could be out searching. So as many police officers you have. Sometimes if there's a kidnapped child or someone who's lost, a lot of times people will donate their time. So like just people out in the city, they'll hear about it and come help do this strip search. And what they do is you'll just line up on the line together and then everybody just walks at the same time. So like you'll just walk out. And if you find things along the way, then you mark it as evidence. But that's the fastest one, is just you pick a side and just walk all at once. But usually that means that you're going to have so I'm pretending my fingers are people, several people all walking out at the same time. If I just have one person doing a strip method, I mean, they're going to miss everything over here and everything over here. So that requires lots of people. Last one is the quadrant zone. So this one's more for like small spaces. So this is what I was talking about. If you were like inside of home, usually you're going to be doing the quadrant. So you're going to mark it into quadrants. Mostly that's just to designate, like, I'm going to do this quadrant, you're going to do this one, you're going to do this one. So kind of try to divvy up who's going to be where to help save time. And then each of these zones, you're going to search every single section of that zone. So if I think there's the most evidence down in this quadrant, then I'm literally going to be on hands and knees and I'm going to search this entire area. I might be taping the entire single area. So that one would take more time because you're covering everything. You're not like skipping these big areas of land because you're outside. I'm searching every inch of that room. Okay. A flashlight or a black light might be used, and you're going to kind of see how that could be used in your little assignment after this as well. All right, so securing and collecting evidence. So again, still S's, so our 7 S's of crime scene investigation. So securing and collecting the evidence now. So finally, we're to the collecting of evidence. We're going to be starting to take down the crime scene. We've secured the area. We've scanned it. We've seen by taking the pictures. Everything is ready now to collect the evidence, all right? So all the evidence must be properly packaged, sealed, and labeled using specific techniques and procedures. So there's a lot more specifics than you would possibly know about how we bag evidence. So packaging evidence, metal or plastic forceps. So see this guy, he's using basically forceps, they're tweezers. They're glorified big tweezers, but they're called forceps. May have to be used to pick up small items, so hair, fibers, pieces of glass. Plastic pill bottles with lids are preferred containers for hairs, glass, fibers, and other kinds of trace evidence. So anything that's really small, we prefer to put them in pill bottles because then they're less likely to fall out. If you don't have enough, like maybe we get to a crime scene, we weren't fully prepared for the amount of evidence we were going to find, and in our kit, we only brought 10 pill bottles, but I need to be collecting more, then I can quickly make this. I'll show you how to make that on the next slide. It's called a druggist fold. And so you fold paper in a certain way to where things shouldn't fall out because you folded it correctly, and then you tape it down. That can be used for trace evidence. But I mean, it is paper. So if it's like glass and it could eventually break out of there and you wouldn't want that, and it is up to user error, like did you fold it properly so that things wouldn't fall out, we would prefer pill bottles. But if you need more and you just didn't bring enough, then you could use druggist fold. All you have to have on hand is paper. Liquids and arson remains are stored in airtight, unbreakable containers. So anytime liquids or arson remains, so arson is burning something down. So arson remains meaning like what did they use to burn it? So if you have gasoline, okay, so gasoline is on the scene and you think it was used to start this fire, that's going to be part of our evidence that we need to collect. But gasoline is a very volatile liquid. What volatile means is it's very quickly to evaporate. And that means I'm going to lose my evidence because it's going to evaporate. So same thing with any kind of liquid, liquids evaporate. So I don't want to lose my evidence. So they need to be kept in airtight, unbreakable containers so that they don't evaporate. That'd be the point, is they need to be in very tight sealed containers. For blood, we'll be repeating this throughout the year, but this is one that's probably missed the most because I guess it's just not common sense. Blood-stained materials, so anything that's blood-stained or really any kind of biological fluid, must be packaged in wrapping paper, manila envelopes, or paper bags. So basically, keyword there is paper. It has to be packaged in paper like this. So why it needs to be packaged in paper is because blood and other body fluids will grow mold. Like it's a fluid that decomposes. It's a biological fluid, and it will grow mold, which can destroy the evidence. Like we wouldn't be able to DNA type it anymore, or maybe even blood type it. Like it's literally decomposing because that's what our body tissues do. And it happens faster if they're packaged in something plastic that isn't breathable. So what we need to help this is air must be able to flow around the evidence to prevent moisture buildup, which grows mold. So paper is porous, little bits of air flow get through paper. Whereas if I put it in like a sealed container like this, or I put it in like a Ziploc bag that's made of plastic, much less air gets in there. So you're going to have moisture buildup from these fluids, and it's going to create mold and destroy your evidence. So any kind of bloodstained material and other body fluid material has to be packaged in paper packaging. We'll talk about this a little more probably later, but also you would prefer it to be dry because if it's wet, it's going to leak through the paper, which would not be good. So what would be ideal is you lay out whatever you're trying to package that has some kind of blood-stained liquid on it or just blood on it. You would want to lay it out to dry, and then after it dried, fold it, package it into our evidence paper bags. Because if you leave it wet, then you're going to have to wrap it in paper, wrap it until you don't think it's going to leak through anymore, then package it inside of our paper packaging bag. For charred debris from a fire, must be sealed in an airtight container, just like other volatile liquids, such as new paint cans. So what I was talking about before, where they had to be in airtight sealed containers for any liquids, this is kind of what that would look like. Okay, so they look like paint cans to help them from evaporating. We don't want them to evaporate our evidence away. Oops. Okay, so like I said a second ago, the druggist fold is something you can make on the fly. If you needed more containers, like maybe you just didn't bring enough, maybe you get to an area that you didn't know was going to be a crime scene. You know, you just get called out and you weren't sure it was a crime scene, but now you need to collect some evidence before it gets away. So you can make these druggist folds. So basically just like you're showing here, so you have a piece of paper, you fold one side over, so I'm folding it down, then I'm going to fold this side of it up like that, and I'm going to fold the bottom up, I'm going to fold the top down to meet it, and I'm going to tuck the top into that bottom slot so they shouldn't be able to get out, and secure it with a rubber band or tape. Now, the outer container is sealed with tape. Everything's sealed with tape. Okay, so any piece of evidence is going to be sealed with tape and labeled. So if you're the one that you've collected the evidence, it was you are going to tape across the top and you are going to sign your signature because you did it. You collected this evidence, and you're just going to have date and time as well. But it's definitely going to at least have your signature labeled across the tape. Now, why that is important is if they pull that evidence out later to be analyzed, whatever kind of evidence, let's say it's hair, and now we need to do a hair analysis. If they notice that that container you made, this druggist fold that's then been taped down and the tape has been broken, they can't read the signature anymore, then that tells us that this evidence has been opened already. And if that's not on our evidence log of like someone's already been analyzing it, then someone possibly tampered with it. So that basically that lets us know to make sure we are following security protocol. No one is tampering with evidence. No one is having access to it that's not supposed to. So you do put tape across with the top of whatever is like this one, we'd put tape across it and put a signature because it should not, the seal should not be broken. The tape should not be messed with until it's supposed to. And it's on a security log saying, I analyzed it, I opened it for this purpose. So that's what I was talking for this evidence log. So there are these evidence log stickers on every piece of evidence that you have, and you have to create this paper trail of a chain of custody of who had it when. So it includes description of the evidence, name of the suspect or name of the victim if it came from them, date and time of recovery, signature of the person recovering the evidence, and the signature of any witnesses present during the collections. If anyone else was there, then you sign it as well. And then this chain of custody is a list of persons who come into possession of that evidence. So if you were just the person who collected, that's it. You're just a crime scene investigator. You collect it and you pass it off. Well, now whoever's driving it, so he signs off on the evidence because he's the driver. Let's say, again, that's hair analysis and you're driving it to the lab, okay? So the driver has to sign off of it about how long he had it. And then when they get to the lab, whoever is taking in the evidence signs off on it for the chain of custody saying that they have had it for this period of time. So that has to be followed. If this chain of custody isn't, and they realize that there's like a big window of time that they cannot account for where that evidence was or who had it, it could very possibly be thrown out of court. It's not automatically thrown out of court. It has to be like brought up. But if they bring it up in court and they say there was like this 2-hour window, we don't know where the evidence was, then they can certainly start to try to persuade the jury that that's enough time for the evidence to be tampered with, and now we can't trust the evidence. So even if it was like the DNA in the case and it was like, you know, your best piece of evidence, if you have this chain of custody not being followed and they think it's been tampered with, then now the jury can't trust it. And so now your best piece of evidence is no longer usable because you didn't follow chain of custody. So it is very important in our legal proceedings. Each person who comes into contact with a piece of evidence must use proper procedure and protocol in order to maintain responsible handling of evidence from crime scene to the courtroom in order for that evidence to be admissible, to be used. If you don't follow it correctly, if you don't follow protocol when taking it, so like if they seized evidence without a warrant, something like that, like everything has to be legally followed or they're not going to be able to use it in court, which is the whole point. Usually we're also going to take control samples if we have something like blood, semen, hair, something like that at the scene that could be matched to a person. So control samples means it's samples that should be taken from the victim for the purposes of exclusion. So like if I found some blood spatter, right, at the crime scene, and I want to take a little bit of that blood spatter to analyze, see if it's my suspect. Well, I'm also going to need to know what my victim's blood sample is to make sure that, like, well, it could be my victim. Like that would kind of make sense. If it's the victim's blood spatter on the wall, that kind of makes sense. But we have seen it several times that when it's like an assault case, well, the suspect might leave their blood behind too because they had, an altercation, a fight. So we need to test it. So basically, you take a control sample of the victim like this. We take a buccal swab. That's what that's called, a cheek swab. And we'd have that on file for DNA. And then we could test the blood we found and see if it matches. If it matches, well, then that's our victim's blood. But if it doesn't match, then that's our suspect's blood. So you need to have those controls of anyone that could possibly have left their DNA there. So any witnesses there, any victims there, even cops' files. Usually they have all of their profiles on file just in case they accidentally leave some evidence behind at a scene. So the standard reference samples are obtained from the victim, family, paramedics, police officers, literally anyone who had contact with the crime scene. We want to make sure that their standard reference samples, their control samples are on file because we want to make sure that we're like excluding them if we accidentally find their DNA there. Like if they spit at the scene or something, which would be silly and they should not do that. But if they did and we found it and we're like, oh, maybe the suspect did this and it really was just a cop on the scene, we'd want to exclude them. So when there is bloodstain evidence, a whole blood sample will be withdrawn from a vein. So if we find blood, usually they take a blood sample. But sometimes they do just do this cheek swab, which I said a second ago is called a buccal swab. Yeah. So our last step, right, is trying to analyze the evidence so we can reconstruct the crime. Because that's the whole point of this thing, is we want to be able to, without having seen the crime, to be able to reconstruct what we think occurred and prove it in a court of law. So analyze the evidence. A forensic lab processes all evidence the crime scene investigative team collected. So we've collected it, and now it's been sent off to be analyzed. Forensic lab technicians are specialized and process one type of evidence usually, unlike CSI TV shows where it looks like everyone works together, like if you've seen the show Bones and like the entomologist is there and the artist is there and the anthropologist is there and they're like all there working together. Generally, there are different labs. So like if you're at a fingerprint, it's going to be sent to a fingerprint lab. If it's hair and fibers are sent there. Blood is usually its own lab. Toxicology, so poisons and drugs, go sent to a different lab. So all those are different places that are processing one evidence. So it might take a while if you have several types of evidence pieces to get all the reports back from all those different places. Unlike in TV where it's like they're all talking together and it's solved in a minute. Usually takes quite some time to get every report back. Lab results are sent to the lead detective so that they can read the reports and see what their conclusion they think is. So last step is if we have, we've collected all the evidence, we've analyzed all the evidence, we're going to try to reconstruct the crime. What do we think happened since we weren't there? We didn't get to see it. What does the evidence tell us what happened? So the crime scene reconstruction allows the detectives to form a hypothesis of the sequence of events. So like the order the things happened from before the crime is committed through its entire commission. So throughout the crime being done. Evidence does not lie, but it can be staged. So staged crime scenes such as murder set up to look like a suicide cause many problems because the evidence does not match what the eyewitness would be telling us. To determine whether a crime scene is staged, the following points should be considered. Initially, treat all death investigations as homicide. So when we do our crime scene project in class, it's starting next week, you assume it's a homicide till you can prove it's not. Do the type of wounds on the victim match the weapon? So that's something to ask yourself. Could the wounds be self-inflicted? So wherever they're injured, could they have done that to themselves? Establish a profile of the victim through interviews with friends and family. So did they have any kind of priors? Did they have depression? Did they show signs of wanting to commit suicide beforehand? Evaluate their behavior, mood, and actions. Were they acting weird before the event actually occurred, out of the ordinary? Evaluate the behavior and mood and actions of every suspect, so everyone that's near them. Evaluate their moods. Are they acting different than normal? And then corroborate statements with evidential facts. So all the facts that you are finding, getting statements from all your witnesses, are they matching up? And then you try to reconstruct your event. What do you think occurred? Was it staged or not? And that's where we're going to stop today. So that's the end of how we walk through a crime scene. We're going to practice that more with activities, and like I'm actually going to set up a crime scene in the classroom, and you have to go through the steps to try to solve it. All right, so I'm going to pause on notes.